Hi, I'm Emily Fong, and I'm going to wait until this slide goes a little bit further. I'm an artist, but I find it really hard when people ask me what I do, and quite often I'm having to fight the urge to run and hide at that point. And I find it difficult to define what I do because my creative practice, like most of you guys, is pretty hybrid. And I straddle both worlds of art and design with equal footing, really. But it's drawing that's maintained that link for me between art and design. When I was younger, somehow studying architecture appeared to be the more responsible choice. As you can see, I look really responsible with a drill. And I truly loved it, and I wouldn't change my design education for anything, because really what it did is it opened up the world to me. And one of the most incredible things I learned at design school was the importance of perspective. I studied my final year of architecture in Grenoble in France, and after taking 6 months of basic French, and my French language skills were pretty rudimentary at best. I remember distinctly the moment about 3 months in where I was crying on a toilet seat because I'd only just discovered the French word for word. So one of my units was an elective called the Carnet de Voyage, which means travel journal. And this was essentially a week-long drawing intensive in the Alps in the middle of winter. So at sub-zero temperatures, when your fingers are freezing off and your brain's starting to turn off as well, there's not too much time for contemplation or second-guessing line work. So with a bachelor degree and a baguette under my wing, I had decided that that was it, pretty much. My life was mapped out and I was moving to France forever, and nothing could change that. But the universe had other plans for me. And at this point, I stumbled upon a painting studio in the center of Grenoble. And my brain switched gears, and all I could think about was making art. So I had the task to return to Australia with a pretty strong homing signal, at which point I had the task of outing myself as an artist to my family, friends, and colleagues, to which my grandma said something like, "This will ruin everything." So you can imagine my fear when the time came to tell her that I'd fallen in love with a woman, to which she calmly replied, "That's okay, because I know everything about Ellen DeGeneres." So I shed many skins at that time, and it was also the start of my understanding my body as a container, as a building and a vessel for experience. And it was the beginning of my obsession with container studies. So as I've already mentioned, I find it really difficult to own the title of artist, and I really want to know why that is. And I wonder, will it ruin everything if I admit to how much doubt I carry every day as a professional artist? And there's an illusion of certainty with design that perhaps makes it easier to define, or less. I'm not quite sure about that, actually. But art is risky and it's unquantifiable. And 7 days out of 10, not 7 days out of 10, 4 days out of 7, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So that's the truth. But I keep doing it anyway, and I have to trust the fact that casting a banana to me is really important, and it allows me to do it is, I promise. It allows me to do things like create handles, or banandles as I like to call them, for books titled How to Cope with the Death of Your Unicorn, which is really important to me because it's about how to experience this idea of grief and immense loss with lightness and humor. So for a long time, I fought the instinct to allow my work to engage with my personal experiences. But what I'm beginning to learn is that essentially that's where the good stuff is. And as well as trusting in my process, my favorite way to combat doubt is by open dialogue and through community engagement. I love to get people together, to gather, and to create platforms for shared creative experiences. And the slide before, that was my first studio in Brisbane. It's pretty derelict, but it was an awesome, awesome studio. This is a group of people gathering together to draw, which I do all the time. I like to get people together. Palm cards are terrible. I love that even though when people are looking at the same thing, they'll always see something different. And I think this is what I find really inspiring about teaching drawing. And it's one of the most beautiful things about drawing with other people is that you don't just learn from the one who's teaching you as such, you learn from everybody else. And drawing has lots of different functions, and I find it really interesting the way that my drawings have changed from studying architecture and wanting to be an architect to being an artist. And as you can see here, I'm looking at space and trying to understand why I find a certain place really interesting, and perhaps how to then adopt that within design practice. This is the road through to Glencoe in the Scottish Highlands, and you can see that my approach to drawing here is quite different from the previous. So I'm using architectural principles of light and texture and weight and movement, I guess, to capture some kind of emotion as well as what I'm seeing. So a broken femur next to an olive stand in Marrakesh seems pretty random, and it is, but it also isn't, because of something that I wrote down here. By putting these two things side by side, I can draw connections between seemingly abstract concepts to discover new and hybrid ways of seeing. And with my container studies, I'm investigating human movement and migration through the lens of the supermarket. And one of the cool things about drawing is it's really portable. You can do it everywhere, anywhere, as long as you have a surface and an implement and a bit of courage. And I love to draw on trains, because people, they're looking down at their phones half the time and they can't even see you. So I always begin and end with drawing. So sometimes I'll have an idea, or in this case, a costume piece that somehow is more special than going in the bin. So then I'll draw it again, and it'll go back to sculpture, and then it'll go back to drawing, and then to painting. And it means that you can drink wine from my sculptures, which is pretty cool. So if you haven't done that yet, I do suggest that you do. And so this is my ending slide, and I'm bananas about drawing, and kind of a bit bananas in general. But I'd like to leave you with a quote by one of my art heroes, William Kentridge, who said something like, it was always between the thing that I thought I was doing that the real work was happening. So thank you.